Hey, welcome to Paint Draw Paint. My name is Ross, and today we're going to look at drawing with simple forms. All right, so in this video, we're going to look at what the simple forms are, why we use them in the drawing process, and then I'll do a quick drawing demonstration showing you how to incorporate the forms into a drawing. To start off, let's first define form. Form is the physical structure of something. It gives us the shapes and contours of all the things we see around us. Artists will combine shapes in a way to create the illusion of three-dimensional form in a drawing or painting. So what is a simple form? A simple form is just a basic geometric form that is constructed of basic shapes and contours. Basically, it's a three-dimensional object with the least amount of complexity. In this drawing technique, we're going to be using 5 simple forms. Those simple forms are the box, the sphere, the cylinder, the cone, and the pyramid. We're going to use these 5 simple forms like building blocks as we draw. What that means is we're going to construct a drawing by first drawing the subjects as simple forms to work out the key structural elements. Then we're going to go back in and hang the details on top of those basic forms to finish the drawing. We'll do this by translating all the parts of the complex forms that we see into one of the 5 simple forms. So why do we use the forms as part of our drawing process? One reason why we use this technique is that it allows us to organize the visual information into smaller chunks. This reduces the amount of information we need to focus on at each stage of the drawing. This means we can map out key structural elements before we begin working on the details. And as such, we become more accurate in our observations and produce more accurate drawings. This will save us time as we won't have to make as many adjustments or corrections to the drawings. Finally, this technique allows us to break away from the reference or reference photo, as we can loosely reference something in our drawing, or we can make up something from our memories or imagination. Let me show you a quick demonstration of drawing using the simple forms. We're going to draw this water jug. We'll start by constructing the drawing using the simple forms to set up the general sizes and shapes of the water jug. Then we'll work on the contours and details to finish the sketch. All right, let's get started. So here on the upper left is the reference image. I'm starting by drawing a square to place where the base of the water jug will go. The square sets up the basic height and width of the bottom part of the water jug. Now I'm drawing an X over the square. From corner to corner, I'm drawing a line so that I can create an X going through the square. The center of that X, or where those 2 lines meet, gives me the center of the square. This will help me figure out where the center of the water jug should go, and I can next draw a rectangle above the square to establish the neck of the water jug. I do this by drawing a vertical line from the center of the square past the top of the box. This allows me to place the rectangle for the neck of the water jug. That vertical line will represent the center of that rectangle, meaning that each half of the rectangle will be equal in width in relationship to each other. Next, we draw the circle to establish the sphere, which will represent the base of our water jug. We use that square to establish the height and width of this circle. The square actually makes it easier to draw a consistent round circle. Next, I draw on the cylinder that represents the neck of the water jug. We can use the rectangle to establish the height of that cylinder and draw the top and the bottom at or near the top and the bottom of our original rectangle. Here I'm drawing a couple of contour lines just to establish the volume or depth of the sphere. It's not really necessary at this stage of the drawing, but it does help us remember that this is a volumetric object and not a flat shape. The sphere and cylinder that we drew represent the big forms of that water jug. We can now start to draw the smaller forms. Here I'm drawing a cylinder to represent the lid of the water jug. Now I'm drawing the base or the foot of the water jug, representing it as a cylinder or kind of a combination between a cylinder and a cone, with the base of the foot being larger and the top of the foot being narrower. From the angle that we're seeing the water jug, there's not a lot of volumetric information in the water spout, so I'm just going to draw it as a simple triangle at this stage. The handle is a bit of a complex form, but we can think of it as a bent cylinder. So I'm going to roughly work out the contours of that cylinder for the handle right now. We've now drawn all the simple forms for the subject of our drawing. This has helped us establish a few key things that are important to our drawing. We've established the overall size of our drawing in relationship to the page. We've worked out the relative sizes of the parts of the object that we are drawing. So for example, we've worked out how big the base of the water jug should be compared to the neck of the water jug. We've worked out the placement or positioning of all the parts of the subject within our drawing. For this drawing, it may seem a bit simplistic, but remember we did need to establish the center of the neck of our water jug over the base, and we used that center line to do that. We used the simple forms to make sure that that was correct before we move on to doing any of the details or contours. Now that we've got all that worked out, we can go back and just double check things before we move on, and if there's anything we need to correct, we can correct it at this stage. After we've made all our corrections and adjustments to the drawing at this stage, we're ready to work on the contours. First, I'm going to make sure that my contours line up by drawing these guidelines across the form. This is because the object is a symmetrical object, and using guidelines helps me keep things symmetrical. Drawing the contours almost becomes like connecting the dots, because we can use the simple forms and guidelines to connect the contours to the basic shapes. This becomes a matter of observation, and that's observing both our drawing and the subject matter that we're drawing. So in this case, we're going to look at the photograph, see where those contours go, and then move back to our drawing, analyze that drawing, and see how those contours would fit to our simple forms. So the rest of the process is pretty straightforward. We look at our subject matter, we determine what the contours should be, we go back and we look at our drawing, see how those contours would fit to our structure, and continue to refine, working from the bigger shapes and bigger contours down to the smaller and smaller ones. Here I illustrate the volume or three-dimensional depth of the water spout by adding a small triangle to the top of my original triangle. I then look for and draw the smaller shapes and contours of the lid to refine its look and fit it to the water spout. You'll notice that I'm now working on the handle, drawing the smaller forms in simple form. I could have done this earlier in the drawing process, but I decided to leave it to the end just to make sure that I had everything else correct before I worked on those smaller details. Now I'm doing the same thing for the foot of the water jug as I look for and draw the smaller contours and shapes of the foot. You'll notice that as I do this, the smaller details will begin to emerge and the drawing will begin to look like the water jug from the reference. For the rest of this drawing demonstration, all I'm doing is refining the drawing. It's good practice at this stage to look back and forth between your reference photo and your drawing. When you do this, you can look at the key details for the area you're working on in your reference photo and take that information and apply it to the structure within your drawing. You may have noticed that I'm starting to darken my lines as I get closer to the finished drawing. This is because I'm getting closer to the final lines of the drawing, and I can darken those lines to indicate that they are part of the finished drawing. What I'm drawing now is a boundary line between my light side and my shadow side, something that I like to do in my drawing process. Though this lesson really isn't about shading, I thought I'd do a little bit of that so you can get a sense of a somewhat completed drawing and see the benefits of using this technique of drawing with simple forms. Okay, that's it. We've now drawn our first drawing using simple forms to build the underlying structure of the subject we are observing and drawing. Why don't you give this a try? Pick something to draw, then look for the simple forms underlying the structure of that object, and then draw those forms. If you want to draw the same object that I drew in the demonstration, you can find a link to the reference photo below. When you're drawing those simple forms, remember to use those simple forms to set up the scale of your drawing, the proportions of the parts within the drawing, or the relative sizes of those parts within the drawing, and then use those simple forms to position all those parts and elements well within that drawing.